you, Mr. Roussel. Good to see both of you back in committee. I'm going to ask Mr. Perrault you some questions about the so-called longest ballot committee, which you reference in your report. In the last election, this group targeted the Carleton riding, although prior to the last election, they targeted several by-elections, and then later targeted the Battle River Crowfoot riding in the recent by-election, with a total of 91 candidates in Carleton, a record 203 candidates in Battle River Crowfoot. Would you agree, broadly speaking, that the committee's tactic to flood the ballot with an endless list of candidates had an overall disruptive and negative impact on the electoral process in Carleton, in the prior by-elections, and in Battle River Crowfoot?
Certainly, it did have such an impact, and it was a challenge for a number of voters, especially those with disabilities, to be able to cast their ballot with such a long list of electors. And that is why, Mr. Chair, I've come to this committee in the past and recommended some changes to make sure that this can be addressed.
And just to sort of flesh out some of the challenges that this committee created. You referred to voters with disabilities. That would include voters with visual impairments, mobility issues, literacy challenges. Would that be correct?
I would include as well voters with dexterity or to handle such a large ballot. People who are physically impaired, who have limitations, would also face a challenge.
So it negatively impacted on voter autonomy.
That is that's what we find, yes.
And further to that, in the Carleton riding, it resulted in longer lineups at the polls?
It certainly resulted in longer lineups. Of course, much longer processes to count the ballots, as we're aware. We had to advance the count for 3 hours for the advanced polls count during that day, and the count extended throughout the night.
And in Battle River Crowfoot riding, it necessitated the adoption of an adapted ballot. And I presume that also created its challenges. Is that fair for certain voters?
Certainly, voters, for example, who would use the Braille list to cast a ballot would have a different experience. So yes, it does create challenges. Electors with low literacy or people who have difficulty writing, manipulating a pen or pencil, may find that to be challenging. I think from my perspective, one of the important point also is the fact that it requires me to set aside the rules that Parliament has passed for the format of the ballot. And that's something, of course, that I had to do to make sure the election could proceed. But as I said before this committee, it's not something that I do lightly. And that's why I hesitated before moving to a write-in ballot format, which is a greater variation from what is prescribed in the legislation.
Now, you mentioned that you had recommended some amendments to the Canada Elections Act. I know that in September 2024, following disruptions that occurred in by-elections, you wrote to the then Minister of Democratic Institutions, Dominic LeBlanc, to express your concerns about the impact of the longest ballot committee and proposed an amendment to the Canada Elections Act. Did you receive a response from the minister?
I'd just like to, Mr. Chair, to also mention that I shared, of course, that recommendation with the committee as well. It wasn't just to the minister. In terms of a commitment to make the changes, I did not receive a commitment to make the changes.
Now, that recommendation was what? Just if you could elaborate on that.
So my recommendation was to ensure that the 100 signatures that are currently required, a bit less in some of the remote ridings, low-density ridings, that the 100 signatures be unique signatures. That a person, and I believe that is the philosophy of the legislation, though not the letter, that a person who endorses the nomination of a candidate endorses the nomination of that particular candidate and not just any candidate, whoever that candidate may be. And I believe that that is the approach of the longest ballot committee signators, that they endorse anybody and everybody who wishes to be part of the long ballot initiative. So I don't think that's aligned with the spirit of the legislation. I also caution, however, that the requirement, should it be implemented, the requirement to have unique signatures should be something which may carry a fine, for example. Could be a few $100s, could be $1,000, but should not be caused to invalidate a nomination. As a candidate, the candidate would not know that a signature, a good faith candidate, would not know that somebody has signed on to somebody else's nomination paper. And the last thing that we would want is to have returning officers having to verify the 100 signatures to chase down, the potential double signatures, which may be in good faith. It may be somebody who was confused and wanted to be supportive, didn't understand the rules. But we don't want, certainly, a candidate nomination to be questioned just because one of the 100 names happened to be in somebody else's nomination paper as well. So my recommendation was that there be a prohibition for double signatures, a prohibition on inducing or encouraging people to do that, accompanied by sanctions. Again, it could be a fine, but without such a rule invalidating the nomination of any candidate. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, unless the candidate induced himself or herself.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Mr. Lewis, for 6 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Monsieur Perrault, Monsieur Roussel, for being here. I appreciate it. Canadians want to thank you for the job you had protecting our elections. And at the same time, too, maybe people of Canada want to thank the 230,000 people who stepped up to serve their country for elections, including the 343 electoral officers who have that thankless job that if everything goes right, they are unnoticed, and if something goes wrong, they're on the front page. So I just want to take this time to thank you also for a very thorough report on the election and for your agreement to be here today, because this is an ongoing issue where we can always strive to be better, and you're getting challenges that are changing constantly. So what I wanted to touch base on was maintaining electoral integrity and addressing, you said disinformation. In your words, I believe you said disinformation was the biggest threat. And so what specific disinformation narratives did Elections Canada encounter during the election, and how do you address something like that in real time? In your words, you've got a month and change to address this. What are the challenges there, and what did you see as far as disinformation?
So there was a number of narratives, not necessarily surprising ones. We see similar narratives emerge in different jurisdictions, whether it's the UK, the US, and they tend to circulate in Australia, for example. So, for instance, a very common, probably one of the most dominant one in this election was the idea that pencils were provided so that votes could be erased. And, of course, that's not the reason why pencils are provided, and people can use a pen if they so wish. But that is something that is entirely predictable. And so these kinds of narratives, as we observe them around the world, we prepare and we provide. One of the resources was Electoral. So we had a list of common false narratives or incorrect narratives with correct information on them. So by preparing this in advance and by having a range of information on every aspect of the electoral process, we were ready to respond quickly to point people to the correct information.
Great. I was going to ask about Electoral, but I'll tie that in. That was used to counter false claims. That disinformation, I'm assuming social media would be the way that it was spread the most. Is that something that you're monitoring as well, and then addressing that with Electoral? And is that something that you're looking at in between elections to get on top of whatever trends might be happening elsewhere?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we do monitor across between elections, across the electoral cycle, though not the same size of a team. But we in this election, for instance, we monitored in 22 languages, some 60 platforms. So it is quite extensive during election period. The number of languages and platforms reduces between elections. Obviously, Canadians are increasingly getting their information from social media, and that certainly contributes to the challenge of combating misinformation about the electoral process.
I think we're on the same page, because my next question dovetails off of that as well. We're a multicultural nation, and there are I believe you said about up to 60 digital platforms monitored and multiple languages. So what extra challenges and how do you decide how to reach out through various channels in various languages? How are those decisions made?
So we have information products in different languages. As I mentioned, we have them in 50 languages, but we also provided media information packages. That's particularly important for diaspora communities who often have their own media or radio or channels, and we provide additional information to those media in the language of the diaspora communities. So we did that in this election more than, I don't have the numbers with me, but certainly in Chinese and Mandarin, for example, we had more information available in those languages to circulate.